Hi, I'm Russell White from Driver Safety Australia, and we're proud to be working alongside national seniors and the New South Wales State Government to bring you this road safety webinar. Now, road safety is a critical issue for every person using the road network, no matter how much we use the roads or how old we are. Although the risk of being involved in a crash is much lower amongst senior Australian adults in terms of actual rate per population, the risk of being killed or injured when a crash actually does occur is much greater as we age. In fact, statistics from the Federal Department of Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development show that in the past few years, road fatalities for the 65 plus age bracket have on average accounted for around 20% of the nation's road toll. Now, whilst your age might give you some benefits in terms of actual on-road experience, it can create issues in other areas, such as physical or cognitive abilities. Now that means our vision, perception and reaction times could all degenerate over time. New road rules, new roads and new car technologies, as well as the general culture on our streets, can also add to an increased level of difficulty. Now, of course, eventually there will come a time when you have to hang up the keys totally. But having said that, there are a few simple steps that you can take to help you stay mobile and to stay safe. Often, continuing to drive or be safely mobile is simply a matter of following a few basic safety tips and being really honest with yourself about your abilities behind the wheel. The purpose of this webinar is to give you some additional vital insights to help make your time on the road safer and more enjoyable. So today we want to cover a few different key aspects. We'll look at things like road risk and exposure, being fit to drive, key principles for driving technique, modern safety systems, and finally, road rules and roundabouts. Now, we want to frame all this on the principle that we're not trying to alter everything you do behind the wheel. It's really about raising your own personal awareness and adding a few more vital skills to improve your current on-road abilities. Now, in my general road safety space, my industry is judged on success or failure, or pretty much on the number of fatalities that occur on Australian roads. It may shock you to know that back in the 1970s, Australia's road toll was heading towards 4,000 people a year being killed on our roads. Now, fortunately, that figure has come down to around about 1,100 people, but that's still nowhere near the zero road deaths that we're actually aiming for. We still have a way to go. Now, a lot of those improvements came through things like better emergency response, better vehicle design, better road infrastructure, better enforcement. And those things progressively brought our road toll down. But the area that never really got addressed was that area of human factors and human performance. But the fatalities are only ever the tip of the iceberg. And as this graphic shows, really for every single fatality, there's at least 30 other people that have been seriously injured or hospitalised. There's at least 300 minor injuries. But it's the next two bottom lines that we really want to look at. And that's really the 3,000 near misses and the more than 30,000 at-risk situations that we'll deal with for every one fatality. So if we multiply 1,100 by 30,000, it gives us an indication as to the level of risk that we're actually dealing with. And it's really how we deal with the at-risk situations that will ultimately govern whether we get to a zero road toll or how we can reduce the level of fatalities. So I guess what's really needed is a change in overall culture, if you like. We need to get away from this view that just more law enforcement is going to fix it or that better cars will just fix it. As long as there are human beings engaged in the road network and driving vehicles, there is always going to be room to address the human factors. And that's largely an area that has pretty much remained untouched, even since, as I mentioned before, the engineering successes that we've had since the 1970s. So this cultural paradigm needs to move from a straight licensing mindset to one of more coaching, mentoring and ongoing improvement, which, as I mentioned before, is really why we're here for this webinar today. So what sort of things do we need to change? We need to expand to a more holistic approach. So as I mentioned before, that means moving beyond simply focusing on strictly just road rules. Now they're important, but they're not the sole answer to the whole thing. We need to look at how the human interaction with the vehicle and the road network all into play. We also need to understand that more regulation probably isn't the answer. In fact, law enforcement officers tell me right around the country that we'll probably never, or it's highly unlikely we'll enforce our way to a zero road toll. That simply won't be possible. Legal doesn't always necessarily mean that something is safe. It might be safe to do a certain thing, but it doesn't mitigate risk, not completely all the time anyway. And we need to focus on the why. We need to look at higher order skills. How do we become more proactive as we drive? And how, I guess, do we look at things like driving technique, situational awareness, and switching on in a mental state to allow our, I guess, a higher level of understanding of what's going on around us. And I guess when we're looking at safety, it's important to look at other areas of life, whether that's learning a musical instrument, whether it's a trade, whether it's an ongoing sort of personal development program or sports. In fact, if we look at something like sailing, sailors are taught seamanship. How do you read the waves? How do you set a better sail? How do you get a better appreciation for the whole environment? Pilots are taught airmanship. How do you get the understanding of what the aircraft is capable of? How do you maximise its capabilities, but also reduce load on the aircraft itself? Again, it focuses on higher order skills and human factors. So I guess it raises the big question about what are drivers taught? And really the bottom line is that for most people, they're taught to pass a set of basic road rules. They're assessed when they get their P plates to make sure they can basically manoeuvre a car from point A to point B without too much trouble. And that's basically it. They generally have received no other training from that moment until the time they hang up the keys at the end of their driving life. So as I mentioned before, what I want to try to do today is to not alter everything that you're doing. I just want to try and give you some basic things that you can refine and practice and adapt to your own driving style. And these are things that you can employ from the moment that you get back behind the wheel. You don't need a special place to practice these things, but they become a new foundation or a new fundamental to build on. So just to quickly go through that list again, the things that are going to be really covering, I'm going to hone in a lot on driving technique. We're going to look at how we can maximise your vision, but also understand some of the limitations that come to play, I guess, in terms of visual acuity or certainly things like hearing. I'm going to focus a lot on situational awareness, and I'm going to look a lot at human factors and also crash risks. So there's going to be a lot of information. It's going to be really engaging. We're going to have a really interesting time looking at all this, and I'm sure it's going to improve your driving capabilities. But the first thing I really want to target in this next segment is really looking at being fit to drive. And this is an absolutely critical question. So let's take a look at what we need to do to make sure that we're in a fit state to be behind the wheel. So what does it mean to be fit to drive? Well, whether we're driving, we're riding, walking, or using something like a mobility scooter, we all need to be aware of the changes to our health that could impact on our safety as we travel. Now, whilst each of us will experience different levels of change as we progress through the ages, there are a few common medical conditions that are all simply part of that aging process. Now, some will result in things like loss of vision or hearing, maybe decreased memory or perception even, as well as other issues such as reduced strength, flexibility and movement. Now, of course, many of us will also start to increase our use of medications as well. As our health changes, we face increased frailty, which can significantly reduce our ability to survive when a crash actually occurs. New South Wales road safety crash data actually shows that people aged 75 years and over are 3 times more likely to be killed in a crash than a person, say, in their 20s. This risk increases with people as we age to then get to that point where we're 85 and over, who are at least 4 times more likely to be killed. So if you've noticed changes in your health, visit your medical practitioner and speak to them to get their advice. They can provide specialist insight as to how you can manage your own conditions and address these conditions which may affect your safety on the road. A driver has to process a vast array of information, most of which comes directly from our visual senses. Our eyes are constantly collecting data that's being thrown up at us as we travel down the road. So good vision is essential for driving at all times, but it's even more important when we're driving at night, in the strong afternoon sun, or in low light conditions. Common eye conditions such as cataracts, glaucoma and macular degeneration can make it difficult to see vehicles, pedestrians, traffic lights and even some road hazards. Some eye conditions can also reduce our side vision, making it difficult to see vehicles or people that are not directly in front of us. Hence, you need to make sure that your eyes are well and truly up to the job, and any inadequacies in that area need to be addressed. You need to have a really strong overall field of vision, and that will include good depth perception and distance acuity. Now, generally our eyesight does become less efficient as we age. So if you find that you're having trouble seeing things as clearly as you once could in the past, head off to your local optometrist to have your vision completely checked out. Now, of course, hearing is also critical, and being able to hear enables us to respond correctly to others that are using the road and to be aware of the warning signals such as horns and emergency vehicle sirens, as well as things like reversing signals from other vehicles. So again, if anyone close to you starts to notice that your hearing isn't quite as good as it could be, make sure you book in a hearing test and get that checked out. Now, whilst we don't all need to be weightlifters, we do need good muscular strength and flexibility, as well as movement when it comes to driving. That's for things like turning a steering wheel, looking behind us as we're reversing, or to simply move around in our seat as we're looking at the rearview mirrors. Reduced strength, flexibility and movement are signs of increased frailty, which increase our risk of injury in a crash. Anything that's going to alter your physical or mental state is going to alter your driving ability. And of course, this is an area where medications come in. Now, of course, medications do help many people maintain good health and a good quality of life. However, there are some prescription and over-counter medications that can alter things like your coordination, mental alertness, mood, and even behaviour. When driving, medications can affect our perception of hazards, reduce reaction times, and impair our decision-making skills. And if we take 2 or more medications together or combine them with something like alcohol, our driving abilities can be significantly affected. If you take a prescription drug or over-the-counter medication, talk to your pharmacist or your doctor for advice on any possible effects to your driving. Always check the labels on those medications, and if you're taking them, make sure you're checking that doubly sure before you start driving. On top of all this, there are other health issues as well. And obviously there's a whole range of other conditions that could impact your ability to drive, either right now or into the future. Degenerative diseases such as dementia, glaucoma, cataracts, and diabetes are just a few. So again, it's really important that you stay on top of these issues and that you see your health professional on a regular basis. We need to make sure that you're in a fit state to actually be on the road. Now finally, all drivers, regardless of their age, must inform Roads and Maritime or Transport for New South Wales if they have any medical condition that could alter their ability to drive safely. Reporting your condition doesn't automatically mean that you need to surrender your licence. Transport for New South Wales will request that you see a doctor to have your driving fitness assessed. Now, during that appointment, talk to your doctor about your driving needs. You may qualify for a conditional licence that allows you to continue to drive if you undergo periodic medical assessments. Something that the majority of drivers have never really been instructed on or received any coaching in is the fundamentals of an actual driving technique. Now, if we relate it to something like golf, for example, we're very much used to golf players being worked together with a coach to focus on enhancing their technique and focusing on one aspect of the game to really refine and practice. And as a mentor of mine always used to tell me, practice is a wonderful thing as long as you know what to practice. And unfortunately with driving, many people have been practicing the wrong thing right from the time they get their license. So in this next segment, I want to look at probably 4 key fundamental aspects to an actual driving technique. Now, this isn't all of these key aspects, it's simply the 4 main basic ones. There's other things that we can build on later down the track. But these are the 4 things I want you to try and think about every time you get behind the wheel. And there's some drills I'm going to give you as part of this to allow you to check your own stability, your own posture, and I guess more importantly, to make sure that you're mentally switched on for the job. So the first thing I want to do to help with that mental preparation is to talk you through a video that looks at the long walk to the driver's door. Now, we're always told that drivers need to be mentally switched on and be really focused on what they're doing. Now, part of the ritual that you can have to help that process is to start to take the long walk around the car. So in other words, rather than coming from this direction, just heading straight to the driver's door, by coming around the long way, allows you to check that the tyres are up, allows you to check that there's nothing around the back of the car that might cause you a problem whilst you're reversing. Now, that could be kid's bike, it could be the family pet, could be anything. But doing that little sweep, as I said, allows you to check that there's nothing around the vehicle that's going to create a problem, but more importantly, it mentally switches you on for getting behind the wheel. So as I mentioned, taking that long walk around to the driver's door just allows you to mentally switch on so that you're ready for the job. Now, once you get into the driver's seat, there are some, again, key principles that I need to look at. And one of the things we need to look at is lower body position or lower body posture. Really, I guess the way to sum this up is that the strength of a building is really dictated by its strength of its foundations. You get that wrong and the end result's not going to be very good at all. And that same principle applies to being part of the motor car, not part of the steering wheel. And it's really where we use our legs or we widen our stance to help connect us to the car and make us more part of the car. So let's take a look at lower body balance. So in most cases, what I generally have to do with people is to use the seat adjuster to bring them further in the seat than probably what they're used to doing. What I need to do is to get my left foot firmly on the footrest and then try and get as much contact with this left leg on the center console as possible. Now what that'll mean is if I'm going around a right-hand bend, my body weight's going to be shifting to the left. I'll squeeze a tiny little bit of pressure on that left leg. So if I've got to do that when I'm going around a right-hand bend, I've got to do something similar when I'm going around a left-hand bend. So that means I've got to move my right leg over, let it slip either more towards the door, and ideally if you can reach the door, that would be fantastic. But I realise that might be a bit of a stretch for some people as well. So as long as you're getting maybe some support from the bolstering of the seat, or at least having a slightly wider stance, that's going to help anchor you into the car. Now it's a little bit like if you're on the deck of a ship or on a moving train. If that vehicle is actually moving and you're standing with your legs together, you're generally going to have to hold on for something for support or space your legs out, get a wider stance. So we don't want to grab onto something with our hands, we want to use our legs to anchor ourselves in the seat. Now I should say that I'm not really asking for enormous amounts of pressure to be generated on each of these legs as the car goes through the corners. It's just a light squeeze on each of the legs as we go through the bends, and what that'll basically achieve is two things. It'll keep your body and your shoulders straight and square. It'll also keep your hands nice and relaxed on the steering wheel. I can't stress enough how important that foundation and that spacing of the legs actually is. Even if you can't again reach the door or reach that center console, just simply widening the stance will help give you a better balanced position and help make you more stable behind the wheel. And the big benefit, as I said, is that it takes the pressure off the hands, relaxes the shoulders, relaxes the neck. Now, the next thing we then need to look at is hand position. And if you're like most people, generally they were taught 10 to 2 to place their hands on the steering wheel when they first started to drive. We'll have a look at this video and we'll look at that's not necessarily the best place to be, and that we can have a better, more balanced position with that, and how do we actually steer the car as well. The next thing we want to do is make sure that we're not sitting too close or too far away from the steering wheel, because both of those things aren't very good. So the way that you can check that is that once you're happy with where your legs are positioned, with your shoulder blades on the backrest, just stretch both arms out in front of you, and what you should have is this fleshy part of your wrist resting on the top part of the wheel. The hands could then gently come down and basically rest at this 2/4 to 3 or halfway position on the steering wheel. Now, if that position isn't quite right, there's a few things that you can adjust. Most cars these days, in fact, just about all of them, will have a steering adjuster lever. So it may be located in different places, and that can telescope the steering wheel towards you or further away. It'll also give you an adjustment for up and down. So when I'm doing that adjustment, I want to make sure I've got that correct reach, which I have at the moment. I want to make sure that I can see the gauges on the instrument cluster easily, and that's basically where I need to set that up. When it comes time then to putting your hands on the steering wheel, for the golfers that are watching, it's exactly the same grip that you'd apply for the golf club. It's that sort of relaxed palm sort of position, nice bend in the elbows, and the hands down at that 1/4 to 3 or halfway position on the wheel for balance. The key to concentration really is that controlled relaxation. And again, if your legs are balanced, if you've got the right grip on the wheel, your shoulders are nice and relaxed, driving should become a much more easier task and something that becomes a lot more enjoyable as well. Now, once we've got our balance and our steering position all set up, we just want to have a look at a couple of final adjustments just to make sure that from an ergonomic standpoint, we've got everything sorted out. There's a couple of things I want to try and show you just to fine tune the final pieces of your setup. So once we've got the legs right and the hands right and we've got the right sort of position for the steering, we then want to make sure that we've just got some of these finer points adjusted correctly. Now the first one of those is the actual headrest. It's probably not the right name for it, it's actually more of an anti-whiplash device. And I often see people driving with them way down too low. You really want the headrest up to eye level, or at least as high as it will go, because it's really to try and stop your head going over the back of that in the event of a crash and generating a whiplash injury. If that's down too low, your neck and head will tend to hyperextend over the headrest, and that can cause you problems. So you want to adjust it up, and for some cars they can also come forward or back, but adjust it so it's comfortable and that at the very top of it's at least at eye level, or at the very minimum as high as it will go. Now the final piece of this overall setup picture is adjusting the mirrors and making sure that they're set up properly. Now the center one is pretty self-explanatory. You want to try and get as much imagery out of that rear screen and out of that central rear mirror as you possibly can. But where I find people make a really big mistake is that they'll angle the wing mirrors in, so they're actually basically looking mostly down the side of the car, or at least the side of the car is filling up a large part of their visual field. The problem is with the wing mirrors splayed inwards like that, you're effectively getting exactly the same picture out of all three mirrors. So you want to try and avoid that. So the way you do that is to fan those wing mirrors out until you just lose sight of the corners of the car. Now that will greatly reduce your blind spot because it gives you an overlapping image from all three mirrors, as opposed to a central one out of all three visual fields, if you like. So that's the real trick to it. When you're sitting comfortably and you've got your position right, just use your adjuster to move the mirror out until you just lose sight of the corner of the car. Do the same thing on that left-hand side as well, just to maximize that visual sweep and create that overlapping image from all three mirrors. So let's just go over those 4 key aspects of the driving technique one more time. Number 1 was to take the long walk around to the driver's door, just to make sure you're mentally switched on and that there's nothing around the car that's going to be a problem. The second thing was to use your legs to give yourself firm anchoring and to use your lower body position. The third was to make sure your hands and shoulders are relaxed and that the hands are at that 1/4 to 3 or that halfway position. And then the final thing was just to make sure things like the seatbelt and the headrest are adjusted correctly. Now the next thing we want to cover is what we do with our eyes. And if we've got all our technique working, that should be a really easy thing to do. Various research studies have shown that more than 95% of the information we need to drive the car actually comes from our visual senses. How we use our eyes affects our ability to control the car and our ability to pick up potential hazards down the road. So what's critical here is to develop the ability to look as far ahead down the road as you possibly can, scanning the road environment as much as possible. The first thing to understand is that we have a relatively small area of clear focus. The rest of what we see is actually peripheral. So in other words, our peripheral vision allows us to see detail in the actual environment generally, but in order to pick up something with really fine detail, we need to look directly at it. And this is why it's so important to develop the ability to scan the road environment and to move that area of really clear focus around as much as possible. Fixated vision limits your ability to plan ahead and to detect potential hazards in time for you to deal with them. So the trick to driving and using this technique when you're on the road is to use your peripheral vision to be aware of your overall environment, but scan around to pick up other finer detail. Now, to do this, you need to look as far ahead down the road as you possibly can, taking in the long, short and medium areas of focus, but also scanning the vision to sweep around to look at mirrors and gauges. This might take a little practice initially, but the benefits will be well worth the effort. In fact, once you start really using your eyes more effectively, you'll start to notice a better overall flow with the car. Your braking, steering inputs and throttle applications need to become controlled and progressive, always trying to be as smooth as you possibly can. And once you begin developing this mechanically sympathetic mindset, you'll start to discover that your driving will move to an entirely different level. You'll become more aware of the road environment and how your actions impact on the general movement of the car. Being in tune with the car gives you the ability to feel what's going on underneath you and what the car's trying to actually tell you, looking at things such as grip levels and of course speed. In time, this can help you to start to pick up a sense of the car's most subtle messages. So as your driving senses start to improve, you can start to feel what the car is telling you, and this will help you deal with any road situation before it gets out of control. Now, of course, developing a smooth and progressive driving style is not only safer, but it can also save you money as well. With very little extra effort, you'll become more fuel efficient and save your tyres, brakes, suspension parts from unnecessary wear. The bottom line is, driving is about timing and finesse and rhythm. And developing these aspects will help make your driving not only safer and more controlled, but more pleasurable as well. The one thing that we can guarantee is that the road environment is consistently changing, and that's something as a driver you need to consider each and every time you get behind the wheel. Even if you're travelling on a road that you use every single day, it can still produce different road conditions and hazards each time you drive on it. So it's really, really important not to become too complacent. Now, whilst there's potentially an endless list of variables that you may encounter on the road, there are a couple of key principles that will put you in good stead should you need to deal with any road condition. Now, the first of these is your level of visibility. Just how far ahead you can see and your ability to see what's happening around you will ultimately dictate what you can do as a driver. Weather conditions such as rain, fog, smoke are just some of the obvious ones. But there are a couple of other scenarios where your vision can be compromised. These relate to the road environment itself and can include driving at night, other traffic, trees or bushes that block your view of a corner or an intersection, the crest of a hill where you can't see what's coming towards you, or dust from a vehicle in front of you on a country road. Now, aside from visibility, the other key thing is grip. Your car's ability to brake, accelerate, steer and grip the road can all be affected by changes in the road surface. Things like water, dirt, gravel, oil, painted surfaces and ice can all reduce the grip of the tyres. Now, of course, these are just a few examples, and I'm sure you've experienced many others as well. However, you've probably also noticed that it's not uncommon to see drivers continuing to drive in conditions without adjusting the flow of the car. And whilst you can't necessarily control the conditions, what you can control is what you do behind the wheel. The most critical aspect to understand is that if your grip or your visibility is compromised in any way, you must modify your driving to suit those conditions. It's a case of reducing your speed and increasing your safety margins to a level where you can manage those conditions. Unfortunately, with the pressures of daily life being what they are, it seems that we're more or less expected to be able to do more than one thing at a time. Now, this multitasking culture also continues when we get behind the wheel, and that is a very big problem. Various research studies and road crash data suggest that inattention is one of the leading factors when it comes to traffic crashes. In fact, it rates only to second place compared to disobeying the road rules. So clearly it is a major problem. So, what is inattention? Well, it basically means being distracted from the task at hand. Now, I'm sure we've all seen other drivers and potentially even seen ourselves doing things that distract us from the driving task. Things like programming the satellite navigation unit, putting in a new CD, daydreaming, checking out pedestrians or people by the side of the road, or dealing with the grandkids in the back, looking at street maps, getting dressed, putting on makeup, eating, drinking, and even reading a book are just a few of examples that we've probably all witnessed other people doing. Now, each of these activities takes our focus off the primary task, which is driving the vehicle. And that has to be where our focus is. But the far worst offender of all of these things has to be the use of a mobile phone. Now, research has proven that using a mobile phone whilst you're driving is a major distraction that will significantly increase your chances of having a crash, whether a minor one or a serious one. Now, a mobile phone conversation takes your attention off the driving task. It also reduces your ability behind the wheel significantly. So you'll find it more difficult to control your speed and lane position. It will also reduce your eye movements and increase your reaction time and make it more difficult for you to respond to potential road hazards up ahead. Now, this applies to any mobile phone conversation, whether it's hands-free or not. Now, I know that might sound a little bit different, but if it's a hands-free phone or it's hands-held, the level of distraction is exactly the same. Of course, sending or receiving a text message is even worse still. It has all the downsides we've already covered, and it will dramatically increase the time that a person has their eyes off the road. So my best advice is, don't use a mobile phone while you're driving, full stop. In fact, if your engine is on, keep your mobile phone off. When you're behind the wheel, you need to focus on just one job, and that is driving the car. Everything else is a distraction that could have potentially catastrophic consequences. Now, as much as we'd like to, we can't split our attention between two tasks at the same time. We're just not programmed that way. Multitasking is a myth. So remember that it's not possible for us to do two things at once without compromising our focus. Doing so means that you're a crash going somewhere to happen. I'm sure we've all heard the saying that goes, they don't make them like they used to. And from a vehicle safety standpoint, all I can say to that is thank goodness. Now, whilst classic cars like this are beautiful to look at and appreciate, it's clear that the issue of occupant safety or crash protection wasn't overly high on the agenda at the time these classic vehicles were made. Now, thankfully today, all that has changed. Vehicle safety technology has played a key role in reducing road trauma. The first level of these systems focused on improving the safety of the vehicle's occupants in the event of a crash. The front line of these systems included things like seat belts, crumple zones, softer cabin materials, ergonomic seat design, and ultimately things like airbags. Essentially, all these systems are designed to improve the safety of an occupant once an event has actually started to take place or a crash has occurred, and they all fall into the passive safety feature category. But as our journey towards improving road safety continued, another level of safety feature began to emerge. Vehicle manufacturers started to look closely at technology that could help prevent a crash from even happening in the first place, or at the very least, reduce the severity of an unavoidable crash or incident. Active safety features are designed to support the driver and are mainly aimed at preventing or minimising road crashes via driver warnings or a direct intervention. The grandfather of these types of systems is arguably ABS or anti-lock brakes. In very simple terms, the ABS system uses wheel speed sensors and electronics to regulate brake pressure in the event of an emergency braking situation. If a driver applies the brake too hard, the car will automatically adjust the amount of pressure and regulate the braking force on each brake caliper and ultimately each wheel. Now, the benefit of all this is that it stops the wheels from locking up, creating a skid or a slip across the road surface. Locked wheels impact on braking performance and will prevent the driver from being able to steer the car around any sort of obstacle simply because those front wheels aren't turning. Now, believe it or not, it's been suggested that the concept of ABS brakes was maybe first looked at as far back as the 1900s, but it started being really widely introduced in production cars in the 1970s, and today it's a key safety feature. ABS brakes will continue to be refined and developed, and many of the new electronic systems, including electronic stability control, traction control, and autonomous systems that we get used to today, simply wouldn't be possible without the ABS system as a foundation. Advances in technology allow vehicle manufacturers to provide drivers and passengers with additional backup systems to greatly improve their safety in the event of a crisis. Today, we have things like reversing cameras and sensors, blind spot warning systems, and even lane keeping assist systems to help keep the vehicle on the road. But it's important to highlight that even with all the safety technology in the world, it's still no substitute for a driver's foresight and care. All of these systems are there to complement the driver and help prevent an incident from occurring. And we need to keep all of that in absolute context. The other thing to remember is don't be afraid of this new car technology. Just take it a little bit of a time, learn a little bit more about each of the systems that are on your car and how these systems actually work. From my standpoint, you always want to have a vehicle that's the safest as possible. And that's why a vehicle with a 5-star safety rating is the only way to go. The road rules have been created for the safety of everybody using the road network, whether you're on 2 feet, 2 wheels, 4 wheels or more. So it's absolutely vital that we operate within the road rules because, quite frankly, our lives and the lives of other people depend on it. Not adhering to these rules can be a costly exercise in more ways than one. And the implications of not sticking to the road rules go far beyond simply receiving a fine. In fact, it's been reported that illegal manoeuvres and breaking basic road rules has contributed to around 1 in 4 or 25% of road deaths in 2011. Then when you compare that rate to around 18% of fatalities involving speed, 16% for drink driving, 14% for fatigue, and 13% for failing to wear a seatbelt, breaking a road rule is the #1 culprit in terms of contributing factors. So clearly, every single road user needs to have a strong working knowledge of the road rules and how they apply on our roads. Yet for most people, they only study them when they first start to learn to drive. And once they pass their license test, they never seem to revisit those rules again. So it's a really good idea to refresh your own understanding of the road rules on a regular basis. You can do this simply by accessing the Transport for New South Wales website. But it's also been my experience, and this is one of the big dramas that we have when we're doing courses, is that a major area of concern is the area of roundabouts. So let's take a look at a really quick video just to refresh ourselves on the correct way to use roundabouts.
Approaching a roundabout. When you approach a roundabout, you must use your indicator if you intend to turn left or right or make a U-turn at the roundabout. You must give other road users sufficient notice of your intent to turn. Entering a roundabout. When entering a roundabout, you must slow or stop to give way to any vehicle already in the roundabout. You must also continue to use your indicators if you intend to turn left or right or make a U-turn. Turning left. When turning left, you must indicate left on approach and be travelling in the left-hand lane, unless there are road markings with other instructions. Stay in the left lane and exit in the left lane. Turning right. When turning right, you must indicate right on approach and be travelling in the right-hand lane, unless there are road markings with other instructions. Making a U-turn. When using a roundabout to make a U-turn, you must approach in the right lane and signal right. Changing lanes in a roundabout. Drivers may change lanes in a roundabout if they wish. The usual road rules for changing lanes apply. You must use your indicator and give way to any vehicle in the lane you are entering. Going straight ahead. You don't need to signal when approaching the roundabout if you are going straight ahead. You may approach the roundabout from either the left or right lane unless there are road markings with other instructions. Exiting a roundabout. As when you exit a road, you must signal left when leaving a roundabout, if it is practical to do so, and you should stop indicating as soon as you have exited the roundabout. However, when you are travelling straight ahead on a small single-lane roundabout, it may be impractical to indicate when exiting.
We'd all like to think that we could drive forever, but there's no getting around the fact that being mobile may not always be possible. We all have a level of personal responsibility in this and being really honest with ourselves about our own driving ability. But detecting changes in your own driving capabilities can sometimes be a little bit difficult. Examples of some of these signs and situations that show your ability to drive might be starting to change could include consistently feeling tired when you're driving, finding it difficult to read road signs or see in poor light conditions or cope with glare, experiencing a number of close calls or near misses or being involved in a crash, friends or family expressing their concerns about your driving, nervousness and a loss of confidence when you're behind the wheel, reacting to medications and feeling less alert or coordinated, finding it difficult to turn your head and see what's going on over your shoulder, finding it hard to handle difficult driving conditions. So again, if you're experiencing any of these conditions, start that conversation with your doctor and your family. Perhaps it'd be also a good idea to book in a lesson with your local driving school just to brush up on your skills and your knowledge. They may also be able to give you some advice on how to best manage your driving. It could be a good idea to also speak to your friends and your family and start looking at other ways to start getting around. Making that tough decision to retire from driving doesn't automatically mean that you're going to lose any of your mobility or your independence. Now, whilst there might be some lifestyle changes when it comes to stopping your actual driving career, if you plan ahead, you can actually minimise those and also maintain your independence as you ease into the transition. Now, one way is to plan ahead and incorporate your mobility and transport needs into your overall retirement plan. So that might mean considering the advantages of moving to an area that has a variety of transport options, with shops and medical and community services, and maybe a few social activities close by. Planning ahead can also provide some financial advantages as well. By replacing some of your travel needs with public transport and maybe taxi trips, you could save money on the running costs of your own car. Using public transport more often before you actually retire from driving is also a great way to get used to the services in your local area and, of course, save money on those longer journeys that you would normally take in a car. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground in this webinar, so let's quickly review our top 10 driving tips. Number 1 is to look as far ahead down the road as you possibly can. The most important aspect to remember when driving is to look as far ahead down the road as you can all the time. Doing so will help you plan your moves more efficiently and it will help improve how you read the road and the conditions, as well as ultimately the traffic flow. Number 2 is to make sure that you keep a safe following distance and that you don't travel too close to that vehicle in front of you. Many drivers underestimate the time and the distance it will take to stop a vehicle in a crisis. So make sure that you give yourself enough space between you and the vehicle in front. And when it comes to travelling behind another vehicle, allow yourself at least a 3-second gap. You need to increase this distance if the traffic conditions change or deteriorate in any way. My third tip is to make sure that you're driving to suit the conditions. Now, as I mentioned, there are 2 primary considerations that you need to assess when you're dealing with any road environment. The first is your ability to see. The second is the grip that you have from your tyres. Now, these are key factors that govern everything you do behind the wheel, and you'll need to compensate if one or both of these are reduced in any way. The deciding factor should be that you're not driving beyond what you can see or exceeding your own comfort level. The golden rule is, if conditions are deteriorating, slow down. Tip number 4 is to check your tyre pressures regularly. Your car's tyres are critical to the vehicle's overall performance and to your safety, so you need to make sure that you look after them. The tyre pressures need to be checked weekly, and the air pressure in the tyre will dictate how well the car performs and how long the tyres will last. Tip number 5 is being as smooth as you can with the vehicle's controls. How the vehicle performs dynamically on the road depends on you as the driver. Your actions and how you drive make a really big difference. Good driving is all about being smooth and progressive with the vehicle's controls. Harsh and violent steering, aggressive braking, or abusing the car in general will contribute to a loss of control. Tip number 6 is driver fitness. The most important question to ask yourself is this one: am I in a fit condition to drive? Driving requires the person behind the wheel to be totally on the ball, and it's not possible to be in this state if you're tired or under the influence of alcohol or a drug of some kind. Anything that alters your physical or mental state will impact on your driving ability and your control of the car. My 7th tip is to stay focused. When you're behind the wheel, you need to focus on just one job, and that's driving the car. Everything else is a distraction that could have catastrophic consequences. Tip number 8 is to stick to the road rules. The road rules and the road laws are there for the safety of everybody on the road. They provide a structure and a degree of order to our streets. So it's vital that we drive within those rules. Not sticking to the rules could be a costly exercise in more ways than one. My second last tip is to make sure that you buckle up. Now, there's no disputing the fact that seatbelts save lives. Making sure that you're wearing your seatbelt is arguably the most significant thing you can do to improve your level of safety when you're behind the wheel. So make sure you and everybody else in your car is buckled in correctly. And my final tip is to know your car and to maintain your vehicle in a roadworthy condition. A car is like any other piece of machinery in the sense that it will need some basic maintenance from time to time in order to make sure that it's in working condition all the time. As drivers, we need to be familiar with the basics that we can do and the things we can check when it comes to our car's vital systems. This includes checking the level of the engine oil, the battery condition, the coolant, windscreen washer, as well as the brake and power steering fluid. So check your owner's manual if you'd have any doubt, or contact your local dealer or service department for more information. In closing, it's really important that you evaluate your own driving ability really honestly as we get older. So be sure to make sure that you keep all of these tips in mind, and don't be afraid to continually ask yourself this very critical question: am I right to drive? Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, drive safely.